All right, coming back. Second topic we want to discuss today. We see, and you and I have kicked this around before, and just in terms of the presentation of Black Americans in our society, a lot of times takes one of as a victim, and that's not unfounded. Like in fact, you can say historically there wasn't enough attention paid to the things that were happening from a negative standpoint to Black Americans, either from a standpoint of economic opportunities, things like, if you go back even to the New Deal, things they were kept out of, GI Bill, or like all types of things where there wasn't enough attention paid to how our society was underserving Black Americans. The question we've seen raised now, which is an interesting question, is whether too much attention whether we swung too far to the other side. And so too much attention now is being paid to Black folks being a victim in the United States, to the extent that much attention focuses people or focuses too many people, particularly African Americans, young African Americans, on the idea that things are hopeless and there's no point in even trying because things are, it's just all bad for you. It gets people in that kind of mindset, as opposed to one of, okay, let's keep working and so forth, or let's find constructive ways to address this hurdle so that we can, make things more attainable or accessible. So what do you think, man? Do you think it's possible that kind of the negativity and the messages that we see about what's happening with Blacks in America, or is it just kind of that, it may be too much, it may be actually undermining, looking at, and again, this is a loaded question because it comes with all of the idea of what Black Americans have been through, like as from a standpoint in this country and the way that race has been dealt with in this country. But do you think it's possible that there's too much negativity in terms of what people are seeing now, particularly young African Americans?
That's kind of like in the last section. It's a difficult question to ask because, number one, there's millions of things being looked at every day on the internet. So I think there's a smorgasbord of probably disinformation and BS that, probably leans people to feel more negative about, their own place in their own society than otherwise maybe we might have seen had we not had this type of technology develop. And I do think there's also in this era, like we talk about with politics and everything else, is kind of post-truth era, right? I think one of the victims of that is actual history. And we've seen this campaign in our state. I find it interesting now that our governor here in Florida is beginning to reverse his attack on kind of the books in the school system, because it clearly has been sloppy. But I think that it's kind of this narrative of everybody picking at our history has kind of obscured the ability for us to see and really discuss things like progress. And I've had this kind of running joke to say, sometimes I feel like part of the reason why we're in some of these cultural wars is because integration worked. We don't like to talk about the history of America, segregation, what happened post-Reconstruction, so on and so forth. So we have a lot of Americans on various sides of these debates, spectrums, whether white or Black Americans, that are misled about what happened in the past, what's going on now. And I think from directly to your point about Black Americans, sometimes we don't focus enough on the progress that's been made. We do focus a lot of times on negative parts of the past and then things that are still negative today, but without the context of, hey, things are a lot better. Like it's 2024. I'd rather be Black in this country today than in 1974 or 1944 or 1914 or 1874, and obviously before 1865. So, that's the conversation we tend not to have. It's either this or this. Like, it's either I got to say America's awesome. It never had, like Nikki Haley, America's never been a racist country, and have this delusion about the past. Or I got to be Mr. Militant and, talk about how oppressive everything is today. And, Black man has it terrible and and our neck is at the boot of the white man type of thing. And neither extreme is true.
Yeah. Well, I'll quibble one thing you said. There was a sliver, like in that 1860s, late 1860s, early 1870s, called the Reconstruction, where things were okay, I think, for Black folks before. Then it got put down violently.
Yeah, but they didn't have a PlayStation 5. So, and I didn't have a dispensary 1 mile from my house back then. So, I guess I got out of farm.
That's just being an American now. But nonetheless.
Well, so that's why 24 is still better. And I didn't have Uber Eats for after I get back from the dispensary. But anyway, go ahead.
By and large, I do think that, you're onto something. And I think what it is basically is we're, at least I know for me, sensitive to the idea that a lot of the what was actually happening from a bad standpoint had been covered up for a long time. And then a lot of, either the bad or the good had been covered up historically. And so learning this stuff, there's a Black History Month. We're in Black History Month right now because it had been the tendency of the mainstream of society to not get into this stuff for various reasons. If it was things that was positive, they either, didn't want that out there or didn't find it to be significant or, like nefarious or unnefarious reasons why it didn't make it out. If things that was negative and people feel guilt about it or something like that, they don't want it out there. So for various reasons, the reasons actually for the point of this conversation aren't as important. The information wasn't out there. But I think what we're seeing and what needs to happen is we need to recalibrate for our modern information environment. What we know about our modern information environment right now is that negativity is what's going to spread faster than anything. And what we know about social media and things like that is that it causes imperceived changes in behavior. And so if you put those two together, then you are going, if you just keep presenting things, if you try to present things in a fair and way with a lot of perspective, like, hey, here's the things that have been good, here's the things that have been bad. The things you say that are bad are going to they're going to spread more because negativity spreads faster. And because of the repetition and the way information is presented to people in our current media environment, social media and so forth, this is going to change their brains, change their minds in ways that they may not even know. So they're going to receive the negative messages more and they're going to internalize those negative messages more. So I think really the problem is less that as a society, we've become more negative as in terms of what people trying to get information out there are doing. But I think that the negative just resonates more now, spreads more now. And then also whatever spreads more is going to change us more now. So, you hear things like, and I mean, when you sent me this piece, what came to mind actually was you actually mentioning maybe a couple years ago how you had a friend of yours tell you that, things are worse for Black people now than they've ever been. And you and I were just blown away by that statement. Like, wow, like is this person aware of Jim Crow or slave? Like, like there's been things that have, like in America, like if you want to point to negative stuff, things aren't perfect. There are definitely things that can be improved upon, things that are unacceptable currently. But worst time ever is just, it's jaw dropping from the standpoint of, okay, there's a lot of perspective, but it's understandable again, if you look at the current environment and how the repetition and how what will be repeated and how that repetition can affect you from your brain standpoint. So I think really it's just a matter of we need to be able to adjust how our messaging, and people who want to make sure people know what's going on in the historical perspective, the current perspective, we have to adjust and we have to keep in mind how information is spread nowadays.
Yeah, I think, that it's a couple things. One is, yes, I think just like we alluded to in part one, there's a lot more negativity around every topic, right? Just because of the way the information ecosystems are. I mean, I was thinking about
and
this.
What catches fire, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about even in my profession, I mean, you've heard me say this even personally, right? Like I see that financial media has followed the line from the political media, which is everything is alarming. I just read an article the other day about the S&P is going to drop 70% from here. Yeah. It's like, like if you constantly consume this stuff, you're going to be scared to put your money in a bank. Right.
It's crazy. And like I remember, like over the past couple of years in your industry, they've been saying a recession is coming every year for the past however many years. Every year. This is going to be the year.
No, I get phone calls from people asking about the BRIC, countries, and is the U.S. dollar going to implode and all that, from 80-year-old ladies, I'm like, why are these people being scared of, this is sad that they got to worry about this. All this is BS. And
but
so
all
I
that
think
stuff
that
is done, just to touch back on the point we made in the lab, all that stuff is done because that's the kind of messaging that keeps people's attention.
And that's my point is, I think that the Black community is just a subset of a victim of all this stuff, right? Meaning we're all victims of this in our culture, in our society, that everything is negative and it makes us feel negative about our situation. We've done this show about, look how the economy is doing pretty fine. And everybody thinks everything sucks with the economy. So it stands to reason. And I mean, even with our part one, our country's in pretty good shape, especially compared to a country like Russia, which has, an average salary of 14,000 US dollars per person per capita versus we have an average salary of 60,000, right? I mean, there's so many stats.
You hear people telling us how great it is over there compared to them.
That's what I'm saying. And so they're down on their own country here. So is it surprising that there's a subset of Black Americans that think this is the worst time ever to be Black in America? It's not that surprising when you think about all the ways that negative information and the speed at which it flies around our society has been able to capture other people and other parts of our societal culture to be negative about things too. And so I just want to finish. One thing is, and this is a tough thing, I think, for me to say, I hope it comes out right, which is that, a lot of times in any society, in any culture, people behave to what the society kind of expects of them and kind of pigeonholes them into. And so I'm remiss sometimes where I still have Black American friends that will tell me things like they don't feel that they belong in this country. They don't feel safe in their own country, things like that, which I understand where some of that comes from. But I feel like there's a lot of Black folks that still behave like we rent this country. And they believe this kind of the almost the manifest destiny narrative that, this is a white man's country and all that stuff. And I'll give you an example, James. My next door neighbor who I'm friends with, during this last few years of the culture wars, he went and bought the Betsy Ross flag with the 13 stars and put it on his in the front of his house. Now, I understand that some people have taken that flag to, mean that that's when America was pure, back then. So what I did the next day is I ordered one of those shirts from Amazon and I wear it when I go walk in my neighborhood, because the idea is that this is my country and those 13 stars represent the colonies of the United States before it was a country, but this is my country. So that also is what I represent and what represents me. And so I think we as Black Americans, I would like us to start embracing and owning this country, even understanding that, it was founded by people that owned slaves and all that stuff. That's just the complexity of being alive. And not everything's perfect. But right now, we're more American than we are African, right? Yeah. Just like we don't hear white people calling themselves European Americans and all this stuff. They just call themselves Americans. So we got to stop saying we're African Americans alive. We're Americans, period. And I think that's something that will help us emotionally and psychologically stop feeling like we're on the outside.
That's an interesting point.
Along with fighting racism and everything else, the people that want to keep us on or make us feel like we're on the outside. I recognize they're there as well.
I just wanted to comment the piece about that people oftentimes will live to the expectations, and I think that's something that is very insightful, and that we also have to keep in mind. I think that's the harm. If you focus on the negative, particularly amongst the younger generations, then what you end up with, or what you end up teaching, basically, is this lowered expectation, or creating this lowered expectation and this environment, like you said, where people like, there's no point in trying because it's all stacked against me anyway. And that is not necessarily what you want to leave people with. If your goal is to teach people so that they can survive in the American environment, which has historically and remains somewhat hostile, at least to Black Americans, if you want to teach resiliency, you want to teach that this stuff has happened, but it can be overcome. You don't want to teach hopelessness. And so I think that's kind of the stakes here when we ask the question, are we too negative? Are we too focused on, what the victimhood and so forth? Is that if we create a generation of victims, then they won't be equipped from a psychological standpoint to learn how to navigate through the unique challenges America may present to a Black person, and then be able to overcome those. And because that's what we want to build ultimately, is that resilience that allows you to overcome, something's going to be thrown in your way, roadblock here, roadblock there, dangerous situation here, dangerous situation there. How can you learn to overcome that, to be the best you can be, and not come in with the mindset already of, oh, well, society doesn't expect anything of me, so who cares type of thing.
Yeah.
So, but I do want to wrap from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, we'll talk to you next time.
I'm a Nigerian.
All right. From the guy who just said, don't say African American anymore.
I'm a Nigerian American. Oh, look at my name. Hey, I can say it.
Oh, you can say it. I got you. All right. We'll talk to you next time.